Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. Well, as we head into the final stretch before Christmas, I know people are running around madly buying those last minute gifts and, of course, going to the grocery store. Consumer price index out now, and some mixed messages on the price of food. What did they decide to do with poor cows at COP28? And a couple of really important issues that have to do with the banning of plastics yet again. So I guess we're just going to have to run around and hold our food in our hands. Where do we go for all of this? To the food professor, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director, Agri-Food Analytics Lab, Dalhousie University. He's got his own podcast, of course, The Food Professor, and all of these things. He comes on, explains these complicated issues to us and tries to get inside the head of the decision makers. Well, with some difficulty, I would say.
Yes, a little. It's been challenging for sure. This
Mhm.
fall, in particular, because you just didn't know where things were coming from,
Right.
and the logic behind some of these arguments. And so, yeah, it's been quite interesting with both Parliament and as you know, Senate as
And in
well.
the Senate, well,
Yeah.
this bill 234, I mean, once the prime minister says out loud, okay, the carbon tax is no longer sacred because I'm going to give a carve out for home heating, mostly in Atlantic Canada, although there's I think 3 heat pumps in Western Canada. Um,
Yeah.
so then the farmers come and say, look, we're trying to dry our grain, we're trying to feed the nation, we're trying to heat our barns so that our chickens stay alive. And
Yeah.
he and Mr. Guilbeault just go, never, 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 over our dead bodies. This will never happen. Just a thought on that. Like, why this complete inconsistency?
Well, I mean, I am in the Atlantic, and I can
Yeah,
tell you, given how important the carbon tax policy is to the government right now, I think it was a mistake just to give this one exception, this
yeah,
carve out to the Atlantic people, because now it is no longer an untouchable policy.
right.
And frankly, I believe that the Trudeau government really undermined its own moral authority around that policy specifically. I think a lot of people have noticed or would
Yeah.
agree with that. So that being said, everything can be on the table, no pun, including the food supply chain. In Parliament a few months ago, I did testify before the
Yeah.
Finance Committee. It did recommend that perhaps we should pause on the carbon tax for the entire food supply chain because we don't know for sure exactly how this policy is impacting our food industry's competitiveness. I actually do think that the focus on food retail prices
Yeah.
is the wrong focus because we
Yeah.
don't know. We
I
just
agree
don't know
totally.
exactly how food
Yeah.
prices are impacted by several factors, including the carbon tax. But up the food chain, at our lab, we've been looking into this matter, and we've actually noticed that, in some areas, costs are really exploding compared to what we're seeing in the U.S. And as you know, Senator, there are no carbon taxes in the U.S. So I'm very concerned about our industry's overall competitiveness as a result of some of these policies.
Yeah, I mean, they're still trying to promote the line that this is somehow global inflation, has nothing to do with the carbon tax, but it uniquely impacts here, and also because of the great distances that food has to travel. And by the time it gets to the store, if the price has to be impacted at that end, it's the consumer that feels it immediately. So where are we on the food prices? CPI out, the consumer price index. Talk a
Yep.
little bit about the limits of that as a reflection as well, but what's it telling us?
Yeah, so I mean, the arguments like COVID and Ukraine are so winter, spring 2023, really, because when you look at the numbers now, I mean,
Yeah.
other factors are driving food prices, but not those macroeconomic phenomena. So we're beyond that now. For the month of November, I mean, food like data overall was actually quite reassuring. So the inflation rate is at now 3.1%. Well, yeah, it remained the same, but food inflation is now down to 5%. So, and food stores, so
Yeah.
inflation in food stores, it's down to 5.7%. So those numbers are really reassuring. What really concerns me, Senator, are changes from October to November. So from August to October, we saw month-to-month declines, which meant really the pressure put on food prices was actually dropping. But
Yeah.
now we're seeing a bit of an upswing now in November, which really literally means that whatever happened in Ottawa didn't matter all that much. There's only one category that's cheaper from October to November, and that's fish and seafood. Everything else is in the pluses.
So
So
they
we're not
called in the grocery store bosses and said, "Oh, we're going to read you the riot act, and you've got to solve
twice.
all this
Yeah. So
twice."
in September, and of course they all testified before Parliament a few weeks ago, and all of that pressure really led to not so much change, really. And
Yeah.
frankly, so some of the announcements that we heard from CEOs are really not abnormal. Freezing prices in the fall is not something that we rarely see. It is something
Yeah.
that we see a lot because there are practices in industry that really
Yeah.
helps grocers deal with the influx of the holiday of the holiday business. So
Yeah.
overall, I think Ottawa, if Ottawa claims that it is making a difference with food inflation, I would beg to differ.
Okay, that's really interesting. So when will we find out what happened over Christmas? Whether people shopped less, whether it was, they left the turkey in the freezer and took
Yeah.
meatballs home. Like, when will we get that kind of data and be able to look back and say if it made Christmas any easier?
I'd say probably because I mean holidays are complicated for some
Yeah,
people. I mean holidays can be 3 weeks long. I mean
right,
because
right.
you get hosted,
Yeah,
and our break off date this year is probably January 7th.
okay.
So
After
that's
Ukrainian Christmas. Yeah,
that's right, exactly.
yeah,
What it is the last Sunday, it is the first Sunday of the year, and typically
yeah,
that's when people start to go back into their old routine. So that being said, I suspect that probably 2 weeks after that, we may start
yeah.
seeing some interesting data telling us what actually happened at the grocery store during the holidays. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to take a little look back because we're facing next stages in plastic bans. And we've had a court case on that issue, and then everybody's just home from flying around in their private jets to go to COP28 to talk
Yeah.
about the environment, where cows came under attack. So we're talking about the farmers and the attack because the government has no intention, it says, of giving farmers a break on anything
Yes.
beyond what they already have. But that's, that doesn't deal with the specific issues. So let's go to COP28 for fun and poor cows. What
Yeah.
do you make of that?
I do. So on the one side, I think that that COP events are not as what they used to. I think Paris was really in 2015 was really an important one. It
Yeah,
was an important event to set targets, and everyone agreed to specific quantifiable targets. I thought that was a really important meeting. But after that, you started to see some politicization of these events, and it was all about numbers. It was about the show, and it was about being there. I was actually invited myself back in May or June to be in Dubai, and respectfully declined
yeah,
the invitation because I didn't see the point. I knew that for the first time, food was going to be a big part of the program, which is why I was invited. But again, in Dubai with hundreds of thousands of people, I just didn't see how valuable that statement would be. And now we know that they weren't necessarily. I don't think there's. Of course, they bragged about the fact that there were a few agreements here and there, but I think time will certainly show that Dubai was a bit of a failure. And frankly,
yeah.
next year with Russia rejecting to host a COP, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So I actually don't think But it doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything. I think it's important to focus
No,
on,
I think that's the point. People are doing things, but they when they want these extreme declarations that,
yeah,
you know, we've got to shut down the oil and gas industry or stop the use of fossil fuels, anybody with half a brain knows we can't do that. Our
it
economy,
invites extremist views
yeah,
basically,
yeah,
and so I think everyone knows what we need to do.
yeah,
Whether it's in agriculture, in processing, we need to decarbonize the economy. I mean, I think
yeah,
everyone agrees. It's how we do it, perhaps, that may actually get people to debate a little bit. I'm more on the carrot side of things, not the
right.
stick,
Yeah,
personally. And I suspect, Senator, you would agree with that.
yeah,
But generally speaking, I think we know what we need to do here. And so, but that being said, I actually do think that at the end of the day, it's important that we make the effort to recognize that we need to do something. But what bothers me a lot is when we don't value uh, the cultural and traditional aspects of food. And
yeah,
things go sideways as soon as you start focusing or start targeting the culture and tradition embedded in the food that people actually eat every single day. And that's why I've always believed that, we can do a lot of different things to help the environment, but when you start targeting people's values, traditions, in a couple of days, people will be eating turkey. Are they bad
yeah,
people because they're eating
yeah.
animal protein? It's part of their tradition. It's a tradition, and often when we think about the planet and the betterment of the planet, we tend to forget about some of these very important things in our
Well,
lives.
that's the thing about, you know, certainly here I am in Saskatchewan, people eat meat in this province because A, you can hunt for it and it's cheaper, but you can raise animals on your farm.
Yeah,
You know, an Alberta steak, there's all of
it's
these.
a lifestyle on top of that.
It is a
Yeah,
lifestyle,
yeah,
and to say that somehow if you eat meat, you're contributing to the degradation of the planet. You know, it feels like a personal attack. Go ahead and make your fake burgers, and for people that want to have those, go ahead. I just
yeah.
want meat. That's all. I want the real thing.
So with food, I think it's important to have to offer people choice and not
Yeah,
impose choices.
yeah,
So I'm not an expert in transportation or anything else, but
right.
other fields I think are a little bit different. Other economic sectors are not as personal and
That's true.
traditional
Yeah,
than food, and so that's why I think we need to be a little bit careful. Um, I think vegans are doing wonderful things, but I know personally a lot of vegans that are not in your face. They basically
right.
respect other people's choices, as I do respect their choices when they decide to become vegan. And I think that's important to recognize.
Yeah, I mean, we all do that in our lives. We have vegetarians or vegans in our lives, and if you
Yeah,
invite them to dinner, to supper, you know
you
that,
adapt.
and you
You
have
adapt.
some, yeah,
Yeah.
alternatives for them. Nothing better than an artichoke. I mean, come on, that's great.
I mean, and there are benefits if you're hosting a vegan. I mean,
Yeah,
tofu's the same price as last year, Senator. So there
yeah,
you go.
there you go. Food prices. Okay, I want to come back if I can to this notion of the plastic bans. We went through this last year. It seemed so odd coming out of the pandemic when we had been told that disposable food containers and straws and cutlery was so crucial to people's health and to staying alive. And that's how we were going to help protect our young kids, but are elderly when we send food off to them in a Meals on Wheels program, you know, it goes so that it's protected and it's clean.
Yeah,
Uh, but we're charging on with these bans, even though the federal court said this is probably unconstitutional. But tell me, I don't know if I've got this right. They said it was unconstitutional because the federal government had declared some plastics toxic, not because they didn't have the right to enforce this policy.
that's right. But what was behind the policy was a flawed view of what plastics are. Some
Yeah,
plastics are actually not as equal as others. I mean,
Yeah.
some plastics are actually not bad for the environment. And I think that the produce group in Canada has explained that many times to the government. But I've actually our group, our lab, we've interacted with ECCC a few times on this plastic issue, and it's been extremely
Okay,
challenging
what's
to
that? Who are you dealing with? Sorry.
Environment Climate Change Canada.
Okay,
And yeah, and so they haven't been overly receptive to some of our suggestions, and we're just academics. We don't represent a group. We don't have
right,
any
right.
economic interests to protect. And but we did explain to them that if we go too fast, if we go too far, we can actually compromise Canada's food security. And because at the end of the day, I don't think that farmers in California and Arizona will comply to new regulations in Canada for just to please a Canadian market, which is very small in the grand scheme of things. They'll just go
Right.
and sell their products elsewhere, which would actually force grocers to go and buy food beyond America, where it is likely going to be more expensive. And
No
going
kidding.
back to November numbers, I mean, vegetables are up 5.8% from October to November, okay? And the dollar is still not a non-story. Can you imagine if the dollar tanks and
Yeah.
all of a sudden we have problems procuring some of these products? It's going to be challenging. So I think we need to be a little bit careful here. And but ECCC didn't want any of these arguments. So I'm happy and concerned at the same time by the federal court's decision. On the one hand, I'm happy because I think that Ottawa got what it deserved.
Yeah.
It
What a
just
message.
the policy was ideologically driven.
Yeah.
Okay. On the other hand, it brings a slew of uncertainty for the
Yeah.
industry. We have no idea what's going on. And tomorrow is December 21st. That's when the law is supposed to be, or the
Yeah.
regulation on plastics is supposed to be implemented. What are we supposed to do? So when ideology drives policy, you end up in this situation and it doesn't help business.
So what will happen? I mean, I was in the grocery store yesterday, I bought some radishes and I put them in what is a compostable plastic bag. This is
Yeah.
stuff that is so it should be, but I'm told that may be banned as well.
Eventually, so there are a few dates, key dates. The first key date is actually December 21st with
Yeah.
utensils, straws. Those
Yeah.
are out. Okay. And to me, that's a low hanging fruit for the government. The
Yeah.
big issue are the bags that you're talking about, the packaging, the clamshells to protect
Yeah.
produce and things. That's the big one. And P2 is coming up. And that too is also ideologically driven. Now, the federal court only looked at the first layer of the policy. So, but this decision really brought forward a lot of uncertainty that the industry is really having a difficulty dealing with. If you talk to not only food retailers, but Cisco, Gordon Foods,
Okay.
Colabor, I mean, all these companies that supply to restaurants, they're having a hard time understanding, okay, what policy should we be following? And with food service, what's worse is that some cities, Senator, some cities, there's a bit of a game, there's a bit of a race to the green top. Who's
Right,
green? Which
right, right.
city's greener? So you got Anjou in Montreal that have decided to ban other things. So when Cisco actually drives into Anjou, which is in the middle of the Montreal island, they have to comply to a different set of rules than when they service, say, Westmount, which is a few kilometers west. It's a gong show, and
Yeah.
that's why sometimes when you have political leaders driving policy, no,
For optics.
at all costs,
Yeah.
exactly, you end up in these situations.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to envision, what we're going to do when we leave the restaurant. We don't want to waste food. So they bring us a little container and say, okay, take the leftover piece of chicken or piece of steak home. Certainly seniors do that all the time. If they
Yeah.
go out, they'll get sometimes a whole other meal out of that. what are you supposed to do? Bring, a garbage bag from home? And because that's the other thing, you can walk down the aisle in the grocery store and go and buy the big black garbage bags if you
I
want
know.
them this big, and go to the counter and say, put all my food in there, but I can't have the proper sized grocery bag to take home my quart of milk.
It's that's why I think we need like some reality checks all over the place to make sure that it actually helps the consumer or it doesn't confuse the consumer. The other day I was at a scientific event. They were expecting about 200 people. Only 100 people showed up. They decided to serve the lunch, okay, in a permanent plastic container with the food in it. It was delicious, Senator. The problem is that you had an extra 100 lunches in those plastic containers that
Right.
weren't going to be consumed. And you couldn't leave with the container. So the only solution you had was to
Oh boy.
either eat on site the rest of the food or grab the food and put it in your purse or something, and of course, nobody did that. And so I saw all that food go to waste just because we wanted reusable plastics.
No,
And that, Senator, is the problem.
yeah, this is crazy. It's about, well, I hate to use the phrase, except it seems what it's about, which is virtue signaling, like, aren't we good about this? But, what are they asking us to act like animals and go and stuff food in our cheeks like
Do you
squirrels
know,
and take
and
it
do you know
home?
what the academic seminar was about? Sustainability.
Ah, of course, why
And we
not?
wasted a lot of food. We
And
felt
it
good.
could have
We felt very
probably
good.
been taken to a homeless shelter, but they're not allowed to receive it because of health regulations.
That's
So,
right. So, yeah.
I guess the other thing is, and I had this discussion with somebody last year about this, that we complain sometimes about the overpackaging of things, but he described the reason that you have that plastic netting around grapes, that when we, the consumer, go into a store and we pick up this bunch of grapes and we feel them, and every time the oil from our skin goes on that food, it sets off the deterioration of that product.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to do things to keep food
Or that
healthier.
film on cucumbers.
Yes,
I mean, basically, the
same
reason
thing.
why we put plastics on cucumbers is to get you and I to want a nice looking cucumber. I mean,
Right.
that's at the end of the day, if you go to the grocery store and you look at a flappy cucumber,
Yeah,
you're not going to buy it. And
right.
that's going to lead to more waste. And so that's why I think we need to. And the other thing, like clam shells,
Yeah.
Australia a few years ago, they had a lunatic was putting needles in strawberries. Can you imagine? And so,
Um,
and people just didn't walked away from strawberries and
yeah.
blueberries. Nobody bought fruits anymore from retailers like Kohl's and Woolworth because they just didn't want to expose themselves to some risks. So those are the things we need to talk about and bring some practicality to some of these policies.
Well, the other thing is the whole issue of recycling, which we don't do very well because we haven't created the market for recycled
Yeah.
goods, but we also have, every municipality in Canada has a different set of rules about what can go
Yes.
in the blue bin, or or what just gets left at the, in
Well,
the
I've been involved in some of these projects, Senator, and you wouldn't believe some of the kings and queens in these cities. They dictate what's good and what's not so good,
yeah,
and for their own city, thinking that, well, I know best for Oakville, I know best for Toronto, and you got to wonder, yeah, that's where perhaps the government could play a role to create a more playing field,
yeah.
to harmonize some of these standards instead of just allowing cities to dictate what is better for their own citizens. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about the planet here. We're talking about plastics. I mean, these materials are similar to one from one city to another.
I'm also looking, it's kind of like the rhetoric, that, and if someone online the other day or went back and said, nothing that Al Gore said uh about the inconvenient truth turned out to be truthful, like, because there's such exaggeration. If we don't do this,
Yes.
we're all going to die. And I was just looking at something this morning. So between 2010 and 2050 alone, the world would generate enough plastic to cover all of Manhattan with a pile of plastic more than 2 miles high. Like, how could you ever come up with that? How
Yeah,
would
I
we
know.
remotely know that that's fact-based or checkable? And it doesn't get at the issue. Don't frighten me. Give me an alternative. Tell
That's
me
right.
what I'm gonna put my food in if I can't put it in that.
But I
Not-
tell you something that changed in the last 5, 10 years. We're in Nova Scotia here. We are half an hour away from the beach at
Yeah,
any time. So we bring our kids over to the beach
yeah,
every time. We find containers here and there. And guess what? When they see a cup with a logo on it, 10 years ago, people were saying, oh, reckless behavior, things
yeah,
happen. Now they look at the logo and they're basically asking themselves, maybe the company should do something about this
yeah.
to
And they're
prevent
going
that.
online and posting about it.
And it's working. And that's the kind of pressure that businesses, I think,
Yeah,
need. It's
yeah,
okay. It's okay to actually make McDonald's and Tim Hortons and Pepsi and Coca-Cola accountable. Because at the
yeah,
end of the day, those are the things that we actually find in parks and on
yeah.
beaches around the country.
But it's still bad behavior. It's still the individual throwing their cup in the ocean.
But
That's
sometimes it's actually, the garbage person,
yeah, yeah,
because it's very windy here, and I know it's
yeah,
windy in Saskatchewan.
yeah,
Uh,
for
you know,
sure.
things happen, and I do believe that there is some reckless behavior, but there are accidents too.
Yes, no, for
You know.
sure.
Oh yeah, and I've actually dropped things accidentally. I'm
Yeah,
sure as I
yeah,
was walking out of the car or going somewhere else. We're humans, and
yeah,
at the end of the day, can we actually come up with materials that can be used without compromising the pleasure and the taste of a product, keep it safe as much as possible while taking care of the environment. I think with technology, with innovation, we can get there, but we have to give ourselves a chance.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think
because at
that,
the end of the day, it's going to cost more.
yeah,
If we go too
really,
fast, it's going to cost way too much.
yeah. And you won't have compliance. People will just say this is crazy. So
Yep.
give us a path that makes us all part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And then, I think we're
If you
gonna,
talk down to people, if you
yeah,
talk down to
yeah,
industry,
yeah,
that's when you'll see revolt, and
yeah,
that's kind of the tone we're getting right now from
yeah,
Ottawa, unfortunately.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. All right, I'm going to wish you a Merry Christmas here from Saskatchewan. I would love to tell you there's feet of snow, but there's not. It's
Still,
still not,
oh,
my yard is white, but
I
it's
was
not,
in Saskatoon about a month ago, and there was still no snow. I mean, when I
yeah,
was in Saskatchewan, we trick or treated in the snow all the time, and so
every
yeah,
year. And I'm
yeah.
going to tell you last year at this very time, it was 45 below. So that it's only 18 below or 14 below. It's practically
But it's
summer.
very dry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very dry.
We're
But have
off to we're
Merry
off to do some skiing as a family, so we're looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, you'll get some snow along the way.
Yes.
Thank you, Sylvain, for everything. We call you and you explain all of these issues, and we really appreciate it. And you could hear it all on his podcast too, The Food Professor, because you're really trying to engage people on this, and we appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, and Merry Christmas to you too as well.
Yes. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director, Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. I got that right. Is that the
Yes,
title?
absolutely.
Okay. And at Food Professor. You can find him and read him. Merry Christmas. See you soon.
Merry Christmas. Take care. Bye.
And that is it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. We'll see you soon. You have a Merry Christmas too.